The state's Supreme Judicial Court this week scrapped a question meant for this year's ballot that would have brought back rent control. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell defended her office's track record when it comes to certifying ballot questions. Campbell this week told GBH's Boston Public Radio that overall her office has gotten good results.
This was a record number of ballot initiatives we received in the office, in the history of the office. It was 47. We reviewed 47 ballot initiatives. We certified 44. 6 were challenged. 3 were successful in those challenges. 3 were not.
Besides rent control, a ballot measure to limit top legislators' power to give stipends to certain lawmakers was also scrapped. And last week, the court tossed a measure to cut the state's income tax rate, saying the summary written by Campbell's office was flawed. GBH political reporter Adam Reilly joins us now to break this down. Adam, good morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Tori. Good to be here.
What's going on? This was this rent control. She had said it was legally kosher.
The rent
that
control
wasn't the word she
thing
used,
was a
but
big
yeah.
deal. Although I think in this particular case, it's reasonable to have some sympathy for the Attorney General, given the reading that the court gave. We should remind people what the rent control proposal would have done if it had passed. It would have capped annual rent increases at 5% or the consumer price index, whichever was lower. Buildings with less than 5 units would have been exempt. Buildings that were occupied for less than 10 years would have been exempt. And buildings that were operated for educational, religious, or nonprofit purposes would have been exempt. And it was that last point that got this question into trouble at the SJC. Essentially, ballot questions are not supposed to deal with religious matters at all. That's under the Constitution an unacceptable infringement, according to the Constitution and the court. And what the justices found was that by exempting religious units of housing from this rent control proposal, that the ballot question proponents were unfairly infringing upon religion, which is sort of counterintuitive because what they were trying to do really was carve out a space so that they were not infringing upon religion, and the court read it the opposite way. So I think you can make a case that Campbell and the proponents would have been hard-pressed to anticipate what the court did in this particular ruling. Now, when it comes to the income tax rollback, that was more of a kind of a blatant mistake on the Attorney General's part. She wrote in her summary of the ballot question that it was not going to apply to long-term capital gains taxes, and it, in fact, was going to apply to capital gains taxes. So somehow this bad mistake got made, and now that question is off the books. And then, by the way, excuse me, it looked like both of those questions had a lot of popular support. The rent control question seemed to have a very good chance of passing. So did the income tax rollback.
What does this mean now for rent control in Massachusetts?
Well, if the question had passed, or with the threat of it passing, lawmakers would have been incentivized to strike a deal with proponents that maybe didn't go quite as far as the proponents wanted, but implemented some measures, maybe allowed individual cities and towns to implement rent control if they wanted, as opposed to having it be mandatory statewide. Now that incentive is gone because there's no chance that it's going to pass the ballot measure. So I think rent control right now, which has been illegal for a couple decades, I think it's kind of dead in the water.
But it had a good chance if not for this religious exemption.
It had a great chance if not for that. Yeah, something would have, I think, gotten done. I would have bet that something would have gotten done.
Wow. Okay. I want to talk about the World Cup because we had been discussing this week how before it came to town, a lot of us were doubtful that we'd be able to pull it off. The strain on our transportation system, concerns about traffic, the cost to cover events, fan fests, police overtime. We also there was a concern that we couldn't handle this much fun as a city that definitely sleeps. I know that you're still drunk from your 3 a.m. partying, so that has not really been the case.
Well, when Scotland is here.
That's right,
as
yeah.
you said, no Scotland, no parties. So.
No Scotland, no party. I mean, we knew this was going to be expensive. This is going to be expensive, but we're also generating revenue from this.
And we still won't know. I think we won't know for a while how that shakes out, right? We're not going to know if it was a net positive or a net negative. I'm not sure that, I want to just gently push back. Are you sure that people thought that we couldn't handle all the fun that this was going to generate? Or is that just sort of a cranky reporters or
Maybe, yeah,
journalists
maybe I'm cynical. I think it was more like, I think the last minute approval of a lot of this stuff was concerning to people. So we had a lot of last minute approval of the fan fests and the formal events and getting those licenses, and then all of this, approving these public drinking consumption spaces. That happened kind of last minute.
It's worth reminding people that a lot of that happened because FIFA, the governing body for soccer worldwide, is just notoriously difficult to deal with. We've heard both Governor Maura Healey and Mayor Michelle Wu express in a sort of a delicate way their frustration at how challenging FIFA is to deal with as an organization. What I find remarkable is that we made these changes in law, like allowing cities and towns to move last call to 3 a.m. or allowing for public consumption of alcohol, in all these spots in Cambridge, certain spots in Boston. We made these changes on the fly that would probably never have been made if they were subjected to the normal legislative process, simply because the Scots in particular rolled into town and started throwing traffic cones on the heads of statues and, being very drunk and boisterous and then cleaning up after themselves.
Yes.
And all of a sudden our lawmakers were like, yeah, let's let people walk around with alcohol in a to-go cup. And
it was like we wanted to impress them. We wanted to seem cool.
Yeah, it kind of was. So lawmaking, as you know, tends to be very slow here. It usually doesn't tend to go quickly until something bad happens. Right. This is the only case I can remember in my life of fast lawmaking being driven by something really good that happened.
I think there's also two big takeaways. One is that doing things last minute does not necessarily mean that you're going to do them wrong, for all my procrastinators out there.
That's a good one.
And then also, the people of Boston are fun, even if our city has a reputation for not being so fun.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I heard you talking with the head of the council in Glasgow?
Yeah, Glasgow.
And it's clear that there's this, there was this sort of love connection between the Tartan Army and the people of Boston that it seems is going to abide. So I think those are good and uplifting takeaways. Very fair.